Welcome to the studio. I'm Lea Sellers, and in this session we'll be looking at lessons in hybrid working, something that has affected almost everybody in the last 18 months. And I'm joined by a distinguished panel of speakers. The first question I want to put to them is, leaders are having to be very adaptable when it comes to hybrid working. What are the best practices that have already emerged that you can share with us? Could I start with you, Denise?
Yeah, sure. So thinking about some of the best practices, we've really, I think, discovered some of those through trial and error. So I think our democratization has been a real eye-opener, especially now we're beginning to return to the office in some way, in some parts of the world, so not all locations. So having large groups in an office it creates a meeting within a meeting. So one of our big lessons, I think, learned and some of the things that we've really had to adapt to is actually asking all people to join remotely, whether they're in the office or not, using headphones and their cameras. So everybody's voice is equal. So I think those kinds of best practices have come about through trial and error and really understanding the dynamics of how our teams work together. Other areas that we're still struggling with, so I'm actually quite interested in the rest of the panel's response here, is around things like working in a tech industry where we do a lot of collaborative work. We use a lot of whiteboarding. Whiteboarding remotely has proved next to impossible. So we've invested quite a lot in the technology for that. But those are kind of the two really big jump out things that, from the top of my head that I would call out, really.
Oh, that's really helpful. Thank you. I'm very interested in what you say about democratization. That's one thing I hadn't thought of before. Joanna, what has been your experience?
I think one of the big things, and it sounds so simple, is the amount of talking and collaboration we do every day has increased hugely during the lockdown. And we are a big global team anyway, so we were never in one location. And actually, it wasn't until much later on during the pandemic and the lockdown, we realised we'd always been hybrid working because we were never in a location where you could all be together. So we were quite used to collaborating virtually and using some tools to do that. However, in the UK, we never had a policy of working from home at all. 99% of the workforce were in the office 5 days a week. So culturally, that was a really, really big change. And today, I speak to my entire team every single day in our stand-up, and that's great. And also, some personalities like to be vocal and some don't. And using platforms like Teams, you get people chatting in because they're much more comfortable chatting in rather than being on camera and shouting, down the video to everybody. So we've actually found people are getting involved a lot more. And we have really focused on mental health and wellness. And every week, one of our stand-ups on a Wednesday is purely focused on wellness and development of our entire team. And we talk a lot about it. We talk about the support that we've got, all of the resources that we have available for all of our staff around wellness and mental health. And we talk a lot about development, how we can be better and stronger and more successful. And what we also do is every other Wednesday, we actually run a training session for the entire global team, which means every 2 weeks, our entire team is getting training on anything from mental health first aid to dealing with conflicts, writing good presentations, train the trainer, dealing with stress, coping with overwhelmment, healthy life-work balance. And I think that's just really strengthened everybody, but also as a team, we feel closer than ever.
Wow, Joanna, you sound like a sort of model company. Is it not very time consuming, all you do, talking to everybody every day, all this interaction? Does it take far more of your time and energy?
To be honest, I feel that is my job as a tech leader. And I think it's one of the things that has really come out during the pandemic as some of the skills that are needed as a tech leader are really changing. And that leadership skill and the ability to storytell. So every day, my job is to make sure my team have everything they need to be successful. So I need to make sure they've got what they need to be successful today, and I need to be paving the way for the bits that are coming down the line as well. And talking every day about what today's priority is, any ideas on how we can solve this problem, what do you need, what are your blockers? That's my job as a tech leader. And I think that's just come out a lot more during the pandemic.
Thank you very much for that, Joanna. Manish, what's been your experience of hybrid working?
So, Lea, it's been almost a cultural shift. I'll build upon what Joanna has already said and Denise touched upon as well. So it's been a big cultural shift for certain businesses where they were historically all office bound. As Joanna said, 99% of our working was in the office. And as a security leader, we learned to build those boundaries and the perimeter defenses around people who were coming into the offices and accessing the resources that they normally would. It's taken a lot out of leadership to kind of let go of certain controls that we historically enjoyed having and didn't have to worry too much because working from home was a good thing. Now it almost became mandatory to be able to survive in the business. So one was to build that trust with peers, with your employees that, hey, they are delivering at this equal, if not higher pace, which took time. But technology also helped in enablement of a lot of different things that we went through during the pandemic. For example, we changed the way we let employee work and access our resources. So we had to be more flexible on trusting the devices that they can use because of all the silicon shortages, etc. We could not source enough devices in time to enable these people to do what they wanted to do in the environment flexibly. So I think there were lessons learned from senior leadership as well as people. Collaboration, I think, again, Denise and Joanna touched on it, was one of the bigger challenges in an office environment. It is whiteboarding is every technical person's dream. So we whiteboard every day for multiple amounts of hours. So, but we have now figured out ways to how to better leverage technology for collaboration, and it's been very interesting. It's been a journey, and we are still on that journey. The world has changed as a result.
The world has changed, and a bit of a nightmare for a CISO, isn't it, with everybody working from home and letting in those vulnerabilities?
It is, but I think this is a buzzword in the industry, and it's been widely talked about for years about perimeterless defense. And you compromise by default. You don't trust the device regardless. So you put your controls around the data and make them data-centric control. Mm-hmm. We were forced to adopt that very, very quickly in a short period of time versus we've been talking about the theory of it and how one should do it. But as a CISO, it was a steep learning curve, but a good learning curve.
Good, thank you. And Troy Jensen, what best practices have emerged that you can share with us?
Well, I think the concept of what was good enough prior pandemic to now has changed significantly. What was acceptable for the call to grandma to wish her happy birthday is very different than when you're talking to a customer or if the CEO is trying to do a town hall address or something like that. At the beginning of the pandemic, we were entertained with videos of people popping up in the background. People moved to the kitchen, which is probably the worst place to conduct a call from because it's the crossroads of the home. And through experience, people have figured out how to work with technology. A lot of companies have provided a stipend, a budget for people to improve the technology that they had at home. And I think that's helped out quite a bit. And people have learned. Listen, there's still things that are better in the office. The collaboration between people. I've heard the whiteboard mentioned now 3 different times just in this conversation. That type of charrette, that interchange of ideas is a little bit harder to exchange virtually than it is when you're all in a room. And it was interesting. There are a couple of statistics. First of all, this remote work, this hybrid work is in place. I saw a recent stat that about 38% of the people would change jobs if they were not afforded some sort of remote hybrid work experience, which is significant for any employer. It tells you that the employee is firmly in the driver's seat at this point. So now most large enterprise corporations are forced with trying to how to make it work, right? And how do we make it a more even experience between those who are remote and those who are going to be in the office? And a lot of that is the technology, whether you're a remote worker or you're reporting to the office. People also have acknowledged that they are missing technology. Well, you can call a whiteboard technology, but it's a tool to use to exchange ideas, and that's something that's missing from the remote experience. So, what are manufacturers going to do to improve the ability to exchange ideas virtually? I think that's a big open opportunity for a lot of manufacturers.
I agree with you. I'm sure when I've been hearing about whiteboards, I thought surely you can share a screen and do something. There must be a way of doing it. But some companies, I think like Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, have said you've all got to come back 5 days a week. So that it's still that sort of authoritarian, dictatorial, top-down management, whereas an awful lot of people have been flexible and open. So is it employer pull or employee push? Has it been good for people or good for business or both? Can we go back to you, Denise?
I think it's both. I think the hybrid model, clearly there are firms and companies and organizations who want to have everybody back in the office, and they may have their reasons for that. But I think the broad sweep of the market is now moving to hybrid, and hybrid in quite a flexible way, sort of, is it 40% of the time? Is that 2 days a week, or is that 1 week in 4, or what does that look like? So I think that flexibility affords benefits, I think, on both sides. We certainly at Dunnhumby did not see a dip in productivity when we moved to remote working, which I think was the big fear for a lot of businesses. In fact, I think we reached, and in fact, Joanna, what you were suggesting around wellness, we reached a point where we realized people had lost the boundaries between home and work because they were constantly at home. So I'll get up and I'll just do my, normal work things. Oh, hey, it's 6:45 in the morning, and I'm still working here at 8 or 9 o'clock. And there's nothing on Netflix. I'll check my emails, I'll check Teams. So I think that initially surprised just about everybody. I think individuals and management and companies as a whole. I think that's now calmed down. I think people are now much more able to have some self-discipline, myself included, around putting boundaries and having cut-off points. And as you say, don't work in the kitchen, but find a space where you can move. So I think from a management perspective, that was a really big surprise, that productivity actually almost appeared to increase in the beginning. Then I think we hit this part of the graph that says, actually, wellness is important. And actually, we don't want people logging in at silly o'clock in the morning and still being online. And how do we ensure that people have that space that they need? And that really then did truly, I believe, bring in total flexibility, whereby suddenly people could say, do you know what, I need to pick my kids up at 3:30. So I'm going to take an hour out at 3:30, but I'm going to actually stay later in the office, or I'm going to do that. So suddenly being able to combine your work with life was really impactful. And I think people have really, certainly in Dunnhumby anyway, have really valued that opportunity, which simply working in an office you wouldn't get. From a management perspective, I think there were an awful lot of senior managers who never felt empowered to work from home. They had to be visible 5 days a week, and they set the standard for everybody else. Now they're all forced to work from home, and suddenly it's like, hey, this really can work. I think that the phase we're in at the moment is, how now do we take this forward? What does hybrid truly mean for us? And there's an interesting one. I think the first few weeks that I went back into the office, I've gone back into the office 2 days a week. And there's several reasons for that. But the first few times I went back in, I had no work done because everybody who was in the office on those days just wanted to stop and chat and remember that what we look like in 3D, and actually you're not wearing pajamas underneath, your nice work shirt. It was a real wake-up call to how much we had actually missed that interaction in person. So I think that was a huge surprise to a lot of people who genuinely felt they never wanted to see an office again, that suddenly actually there were benefits there. There was a real connection. And the second part of why I think going back to the office was important for me was I think if as a business we do want to encourage people back for very particular types of work, those big collaborative meetings, those just general melee of ideas, of just generally socializing, getting your teams together and celebrating, then to encourage people back into the office, you have to have your senior team in the office as well. You can't ask teams to come in if your CTO or your CIO or your CEO is completely absent. What that does, I'm not quite sure yet. We haven't really worked that one through. But when the senior team are in, we definitely see a spike in other people coming in. It's like, oh, you're in, so I better be in. You can all see me now. Whether that will persist, we're not sure. So we're still on that, I think, social work life learning curve of what that really means.
Oh, that's very interesting. Does anybody want to add to that, the benefits for employer-employee?
Yeah, I would. We've done a few surveys through the pandemic here just to try to figure out, why do people want to go back to the office? And interesting enough, if I look at roughly a top 10 list, the first 4 are, scheduled meetings with colleagues, socializing with colleagues, impromptu face-to-face interaction, to feel like part of the community. Then number 5 was interesting. Access to technology came up. So people have acknowledged that the technology that they have at the workplace is still better than what they have at home. And that could be something as simple as a whiteboard, as everybody mentioned here, right? Or it could be something maybe even more sophisticated. I thought that was really interesting that people had acknowledged that technology was better at the workplace than what they had at home.
That's very interesting. I think it also depends on personality type and home circumstances. If you've got a tiny flat or small children or lousy Wi-Fi, or maybe you're an extrovert, you want to be in the office. So there are all kinds of different reasons.
Absolutely agree. Yeah, I mean, for us, the decision to bring people in or leave them working from home has been very heavily the job function related, or also employees' decision, because isolation and working in isolation hasn't worked well for everybody. And we touched upon the mental health, etc. earlier, Denise mentioned. So it has played a big part in us facilitating, instead of shutting down the offices, say, hey, we don't expect because we're working just fine. Productivity wise, we have had no problem because our working hours, I think Denise just did it again, stretch from whenever we wake up, because we don't have that much dead time on the road anymore, going to the office and coming back from the office. So we are actually actively utilizing that time to collaborate, to be productive. But employees' mental health has played a big part on why we made a decision that we will make our workplace a lot more collaborative than it was. So there were lessons learned. Of course, whiteboard, there is never a use case why you shouldn't use a whiteboard in any environment. So people have whiteboards at home nowadays. So
I've got a lot of whiteboards here, actually. You can only see one of them, but I'm whiteboard crazy.
Well, there you go, and you can share it. You've also got a dog, Joanna.
Sorry, if I shut the door, he'll just cry.
No, he's part of it.
I think with the whiteboard thing, I think because we've always had global teams, even though as an individual, I mean, when I first started working from home, my walls were covered with Post-it notes. It was a little bit concerning for those that could see what was happening to me. But the whiteboards, I love the whiteboards, but ultimately for us to be able to collaborate properly globally, we've always had to put that content digitally so everyone can take part. But I think that the approach that we're taking is there's 4 things around the hybrid working, and that's the role. it's the team that you're in, it's your situation at home, and it's the individual. And all of those are sort of contributing factors really as to whether you decide to be at home 5 days a week, in the office 5 days a week, or anything in between. So we very much talk about what you're comfortable with. And also for me, it means I can hire anybody anywhere in the world. And, you know, I can find the best talent, and it doesn't matter that they're not in Manchester anymore. They can be anywhere. And I'm permanently at home, and we also don't see any correlation between senior leadership on site and staff. We just, but maybe because our offices are so dispersed anyway, we're talking all the time. It doesn't really matter so much where you are.
That's really interesting, actually, Joanna. Yeah, and perhaps that different experience more generally when pre-pandemic. I think the other thing I would call out, which was again, I almost got to the point where I didn't need AI or predictive analytics to work it out. I had a lot of calls in the beginning when we were beginning to think about returning to the office to say, what would your ideal work life balance be? Is it X days in the office, whatever? And I more or less got to the point of predicting that anyone under the age of around 30 wanted to be back in the office. So I kind of then dug a little bit deeper. And you know, I really then began to feel for this particular group of people who, you know, they'd worked hard, they'd gone through education, they'd gone through university, they'd gone through all of this, and this was the start of their freedom. They had a job, they were on their track, they could socialize, they were, you know, we're mostly in large cities, and they wanted that city living experience. And then suddenly they were all forced to work back at their parents' house, or you know, back in a community sharing a house where the work scenario, the work situation was not always good. You know, they're working from their bedrooms and bed sits and so on, and they felt genuinely very aggrieved at that. So that younger cohort were really looking for the community of younger people around them to really enjoy work, enjoy the work community, but to actually enjoy the city environment in which they hoped to be. So that was really an interesting observation that we hit on really early. And that was true globally, by the way. We have offices in India, we have offices in the US as well. And that theme continued. So, you know, I'm fully expecting the younger parts of our company, that generation, to really embrace going back to the office, probably on a more full-time basis.
No, I think that's a very good point, and I'm sure everybody here would agree with it. Most young people want to go in, have the glass of wine after work, don't they? I just want to move on to the next point. What does this new way of working mean for your technology investment strategy? Has it changed your perspective on what you will be doing in future? I think you touched on this, Manish.
So yes, absolutely, and it will. I'll be very surprised if that's not true for most of the businesses, if they are going to facilitate the remote working. And I say this because we, as a lot of other organizations, that the traditional way, and still I shouldn't say that it's a traditional way, it's still very much the way in a large number of organizations, that you VPN into your network, you get access to resources. You don't VPN, you can perhaps browse internet, or most of the organizations nowadays, or some organizations don't even allow that. So you do that. Now, to enable for us as an organization that has multiple blue chip clients and access to a lot of data. So we have made significant investment in how we architect our environment and how we architect our applications. So SaaS is a big buzzword, and it's not buzzword, it's reality now, right? A lot of our organizations now use SaaS applications in certain way or the other. But they don't historically, or they never have published internal applications as SaaS applications. They have not. The controls have still been very perimeter controls rather than, hey, we will move our controls to, hey, where are our data sets? So we have spent significant time and investment re-architecting on how our environment looks, publishing more applications as SaaS applications, even internal, to make sure we have that control on the data and the visibility that we need, but still be flexible on how employees access those services and applications and keep that trust in place.
Thank you for that. Anybody else want to follow up on that, on your technology investment strategy and how this has been affected by hybrid working?
I think what it did for us, we had a slightly lucky situation that we'd been making some big investments in technology before the pandemic hit. And what the pandemic did was it justified those investments. And the investments were being made because we had this statement we kept saying that we were preparing our organization for disruption. But the disruption we were talking about was we've grown by acquisition quite a lot. So we knew that the pace of growth at our business, we had to fundamentally reimagine the way we did everything. So, we went from a world where we didn't use a lot of SaaS applications. We didn't have single sign-on. We didn't have things like MFA. We didn't have tools to actually remote manage machines and things like that. We built hand-cranked machines, built them for staff, and handed them out. But then we were like, actually, we could double in size overnight. We need to be able to onboard a new business really, really quickly. We need to be able to do zero-touch provisioning. In lockdown, we've been onboarding about, on average, 150 new staff every Monday. And we've done 12 acquisitions in lockdown. So had we not have done the things that we did, which was things like factory to home provisioning, with everything provisioned from the cloud, with single sign-on, we simply would not have coped with the growth, let alone the facts operating as a business. So what it did for us, it didn't change our investments, but it definitely justified the investments that I didn't have to majorly convince, but they were big sums of money that we were investing into these platforms. And then it became wow, thank God you guys did that. So we were ready for disruption, just not a pandemic. So we were luckily quite ready for it. Apart from the VPN, where you go, actually, we got all these people, 7,000 people that come to the office every day. We only had a license for about 500 VPN users because nobody worked from home. Suddenly you're like, oh my goodness. And our VPN was not a great experience, but it wasn't top priority because it hardly got used. And suddenly you got all these people going home. You've either got to change that system, make it SaaS, and then you can put it on your single sign-on and things like that. Or you've got to get your VPN improved, or you do both. And, we had to do both. But yeah, things that weren't important suddenly were very important. And we'd rolled out Teams about 6 months before the pandemic hit as well. So luckily people were quite used to using the Teams platform.
But it's really helped your growth, ironically. Such a horrible pandemic has spurred growth in your case.
Oh, yeah, it's been quite incredible, yeah.
I'm a little curious as to, for the people who are on the panelists here on the call, prior to the pandemic, I know there were a lot of enterprise corporations that were a little bit at arm's length on software-based codecs. Did you have licenses for all of your employees for software-based codecs prior to the pandemic?
So we didn't, and I think most of the a lot of organizations didn't, from the organizations I've spoken to Troy, because nobody accounted for this level of disruption. So we always account for a percentage of disruption, the site going down or two sites going down from DR or BCP planning point of view, from business processes, but nobody accounted for, you can't travel, so you're not allowed to get into the offices, leave alone whether offices are available or not. So it was a bit different.
I think actually similarly to Pants, I don't think we didn't see any issues because I think we were geared up to remote work. We had a workforce that was fairly dynamic, that was quite capable of traveling and being off network and so on. Yes, we didn't have sufficient VPN capacity in one location, but we did across the three zones that we work in. And we really leveraged time zones in those spaces and said, right, these time zones here. And then we drove a lot of automation and innovation around making sure that we disconnect people if they're not active for X many hours or whatever it may be. So I think we got smarter. I think it was all around justifying the spend. I think, you know, I could sit very smugly and say, thank heavens we put Teams in the year before. You know, thank heavens we increased and put some, you know, effort and expenditure into our network and our network's performance and all those things. So it was definitely a justification of previous spend. I think we are seeing actually some savings now as a result of that. So, you know, in around how we use our offices now, do we need as much space going forward as we currently have? Can we improve those spaces to make them more collaborative spaces rather than just, you know, desk pods and so on and so forth? So I think there are more opportunities there. So yeah, I think the investment one's interesting. I think it is the justification of what appeared to be a very large tech spend in the years leading up to it, but it left us in a very, very good position that on the 23rd of March, when it was like, no, everybody go home, you know. So I won't say we felt smug about it, because it was quite a ride. Would it all work the way we envisaged it? Unfortunately, it did. So we're quite happy.
I mean, just and again, just to emphasize the point, a lot of organizations were already and are already on their digital transformation journey. I think what pandemic really did is accelerated some of those journeys.
I think that's absolutely true. So we all accept that the role of the office has changed. Some people were ahead of the curve, and that was lucky, and they've justified it. Is there a way that tech leaders can work together to solve this hybrid working challenge? Obviously, some people need to be at work. Dentists need to be at work. Front of house people need to be at work, but not everybody does. Is there a way of coming together to make a sort of a paradigm that works?
The thing that springs to mind for me, and I touched on it slightly earlier, is I think probably as tech leaders, it's that recognition about the skills you might need to use in this new hybrid world are changing, have changed. That storytelling, the ability to, you know, present ideas and coordinate collaboration, and it takes a lot of different type of energy. It's like talking. Most of your job becomes talking and making sure people are understanding what they need to do to be successful in their role and how you can help them with that. And I think, I'm not saying we didn't have that skill before, but I really think it's in the spotlight a lot more than it used to be. I also think as well, technology has been such at the forefront of not just helping businesses adapt, but businesses diversifying and becoming tech businesses. That means a lot of tech leaders now are sitting around the big table. You know, they're not necessarily under the CFOs or the COOs, because as business diversifies and goes, we've spun over here and we're a tech business. You need that tech leader at the table, and again, those leadership skills, which we know there's a gap of in our industry, really need to be developed. And I think as tech leaders, there's definitely a part we can play in that.
I think that's one thing the hybrid working has done is put tech leaders at the table, at the top table, don't you?
Yeah.
People realize. Go on, Manish.
One of the other aspects as a tech leader, we have learned, and I think the future of tech leadership is going to be perhaps also be looked in a different way about how do you keep your technical workforce engaged and motivated to deliver at the same pace as you did in the office. So it's not about us jumping, what we found, us jumping on a Teams call or WebEx call and talk a lot of the different things. Body language, etc., plays a critical role on how you convey the message and the urgency. So I think that's one aspect that we are already seeing changing as we recruit more and more people, and the way you convey the message, etc. So we've used coaches to come in and help us train the management on how do you effectively engage workforce when some of the recruits that you have, you may never even see them in person. What Joanna touched on earlier, that I can recruit staff wherever I want now, because there is no boundaries that I have. Of course, there are tax implications, but that's HR problem, right? That's not technology stopping that recruitment. But it's definitely shown, but also technology as enabler, which business did not always see in the past.
I think how can we come together more as tech leaders? I think that's the real challenge here, and I don't have a simple answer for that, but we all face very similar problems. I mean, this discussion has just highlighted the commonality we all share, and I think historically there has probably been a fear of, well, I can't talk to anybody about this because they'll just steal all my talent and so on. Well, talent is harder to steal in that respect when we're all working remotely. And I think if we're to really encourage people into our industry, encourage people into tech, particularly young people, particularly people returning to work, I think if we're to do that, then I think we do have to come together as tech leaders to try and work out, what does perfect look like? How close to perfect are we? What is good enough? What is it that society is demanding? I made a very flippant comment at the beginning when I was talking with Lee off this call, and said, this is the biggest revolution since the Industrial Revolution, and I do believe that it's a societal change. And so I think, forums like this, I think, are really helpful. I'd love to speak to you all outside of this forum and really dive into some of those more challenging areas that we're probably not really deep diving into now, but to try and understand what does good look like, and what will companies need to really focus and consider on to encourage and attract that workforce. Is it remote working? Is it role-based? If you're in these roles, you can. Is it to encourage people into the office where we need them to be? And what will the perfect model be? Because there's certainly not one size fits all anymore. And I think, so is it the perfect answer? No, but I would like to see industry leaders, tech leaders, coming together in a non-competitive way to really share experiences and almost try and set a framework of how we move forward in an industry. Not to take back control of our workforce in that respect, but to actually work more closely with our workforces and our people to understand more generally across our different locations, our societies, our workforce, how we can make the best of the situation we're in, because I think there's some huge opportunities there.
I think that's what I was driving at. Is there a way of working together, even though all sectors are completely different and have different requirements? Some are global, some are local, and all of them are different. But if there's a way of finding that commonality, I think that would be a good thing.
Agreeing with Denise that we've had 18 months of training a workforce to work differently, right? And now there's a demand to return to the old way, and that, to me, that's a little bit of chest thumping, because it's like, well, you have to return to work. How does 2 to 3 days a week sound? It's obviously there are some concessions that are going to need to be made on behalf of the employer to the employee. And I think that's really the challenge right now. On the technology side, it's just about maintaining, some equity between the people who are working remotely to those who are reporting to the office. And how do you ensure that the people who are remote, their work, their opinions are held as high as those who are in the office on a daily basis? I think that's a little bit of a challenge for the employer.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think for me, this is a real issue that we have to solve, is how do we come together? Where are those forums that we can really work together on? Because if we don't, then talent and employees are just going to jump, right? We're going to see spikes in attrition. People are going to move. It actually is quite destabilizing at that point, and therefore, it's in all of our interests to have that degree of flexibility that keeps people, quietly happy and hopefully mitigate attrition. People should want to work in a company and have the benefits that they need around them, whether that's fully remotely, partially remotely, or back in the office. So for me, I think, whatever we can do as a collective to come together and really debate those topics and decide what is good and what does good look like, and how do we then consistently apply that to assure that we give the best to our people.
Well, thank you very much, Denise, and thank you to Troy and Joanna and Manish I think we'll wrap it up there, but thank you all for sharing best practice. You've all shown care for employees and mental health and the importance of collaboration somehow, whether it's whiteboards or in the office, engaging with the workforce. But you've also seen growth as a result of this enforced hybrid working, and also seeking out the best talent all over the world, and winding up with Denise's point of working together as a collective. So thank you all very much.